For 47 years, a brother died believing his sister had abandoned him. Only decades later did the truth arrive, sealed in an envelope that was never supposed to be lost. This is not just a letter. It's a confession from the grave. The morning of October 15th, 1948, arrived in Whitmore wrapped in gray mist and the cry of gulls. 12-year-old Thomas Hartwell was already awake in his attic room, watching the world come to life through rain-streaked glass. The sound of footsteps on wet cobblestones drew his attention. Mr. Wickham, the postman, was making his rounds with his leather satchel. Tom had observed this routine countless times, yet something about this morning felt different. When the knock came, Uncle Harold answered. Tom heard muffled conversation below, but it wasn't until his uncle called his name that he understood something unusual had occurred. "Tom, come down here, lad. There's something for you." The boy descended the narrow wooden stairs, his bare feet silent on the worn planks. Uncle Harold stood in the doorway holding a peculiar envelope, larger than most, with edges that had yellowed with age. The paper felt thick and substantial between Tom's fingers, nothing like the thin wartime letters that had been common in recent years. "Addressed to your great-uncle William," Harold said, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "William Hartwell, this address. But William's been dead these 15 years, hasn't he? Strange thing is, this envelope, look at the postmark." Tom examined the faded stamp in the corner. The ink was so light he had to hold it up to the window to make out the date. When he did, his breath caught in his throat. 1901, he whispered. "Aye," Uncle Harold nodded slowly. 47 years this letter's been wandering about. Mr. Wickham says it was found in a postal sorting office in London, tucked away behind some old equipment they were finally clearing out. Amazing it survived it all. Tom turned the envelope over in his hands. The wax seal on the back had cracked with age, but remained mostly intact. Someone had pressed it carefully, deliberately, as though they had known this letter might need to endure a long journey. The return address was written in a flowing script that spoke of careful penmanship. Miss A. Hartwell, New York Harbor, United States of America. "Who's A. Hartwell?" Tom asked. His uncle's expression grew distant, the way it often did when conversations ventured into family history. Harold had never been one for stories about the past. He preferred to keep his attention fixed firmly on the present, on the practical matters of running the bakery and keeping food on the table. "Can't say I know for certain," Harold replied after a long moment. "Your great-uncle William, he had a sister, I believe. Left for America when they were young. Never heard much about what became of her after that." Tom studied the envelope again, noting how the edges had softened with time, how the ink had faded to a brown that reminded him of autumn leaves. The mysterious ticking seemed to grow slightly louder, as though responding to his attention. There was something intimate about holding the envelope, as though he were cradling a secret that had been waiting decades to be revealed, and perhaps a heart that had stopped beating long ago, but was somehow still keeping time. "Should I open it?" he asked, though part of him feared what he might find inside. What if the letter contained terrible news? What if it revealed family secrets that were better left buried? Harold hesitated, and in that hesitation, Tom sensed something deeper than mere uncertainty. It was as though his uncle feared what the letter might contain, what doors it might open that had been deliberately closed. "I suppose," Harold said finally, "after all these years, someone ought to read what she had to say."
Tom carried the envelope to the small table by the kitchen window, where the morning light was strongest. The mysterious ticking seemed to follow him, growing more distinct as he prepared to break the seal. His fingers trembled slightly, not just from anticipation, but from a growing dread that whatever lay inside might change everything he thought he knew about his family. As he worked the wax seal loose, something small and metallic slipped from within the envelope and landed on the wooden table with a soft chime. It was a pocket watch, tarnished with age, its gold surface dulled but still elegant. The watch face showed the time as 11:47, and beneath the glass, Tom could see that the hands hadn't moved in decades, frozen at some significant moment in the past. Yet the ticking continued, soft but insistent, as though the watch were still alive despite its stopped hands. The paper inside was of good quality, heavier than modern writing paper, and when he unfolded it, he caught the faintest scent of something floral, perhaps lavender or rosewater. The handwriting was the same flowing script as the address, but here it filled 3 full pages with words that seemed to pulse with urgency and emotion. Tom began to read aloud, his young voice carrying the weight of decades across the quiet kitchen. "My dearest William, if you are reading this, then I have found the courage to post what I have written and rewritten a dozen times. By the time this reaches you, I will have already departed New York, and there will be no way for you to find me, which is perhaps for the best. I am enclosing Father's pocket watch, the one he gave you before you left for England. Do you remember how he wound it every morning at precisely 11:47, just after his second cup of coffee? He said a man should always know exactly when his day truly begins. I have been carrying it since Mother forwarded it to me after Father's passing, but I cannot take it where I am going. It belongs with you, William, as it always should have. I know you must think me a coward for leaving without explanation, without the goodbye that a brother deserves from his sister. But William, there are circumstances that I cannot put into words here, things that happened after you left for England that changed everything I thought I knew about my life, about our family, about what is right and what is necessary. You wrote to me about your new life in Whitmore, about the cottage by the harbor and the woman you hope to marry. You sounded happy, William, truly happy, and it filled my heart with such joy to know that at least one of us had found peace. But I cannot come to visit as I promised. I cannot bring the shadow of what has happened here to your doorstep. There is something I must tell you, though I fear how you will judge me when you learn the truth. The marriage that Mother arranged for me. You remember Mr. Edmund Ashworth,
the merchant with interests in the textile mills. It was not what it appeared to be. Edmund is not the man we believed him to be, William. Behind his respectable facade lies something dark and controlling, something that frightened me more with each passing day. I tried to honor the commitment, truly I did. I told myself that this was my duty, that this was what women of our station must accept. But when I discovered, when I learned what he intended for any children we might have, the plans he had that involved, I cannot write it here. Some knowledge is too terrible to commit to paper. I am leaving tonight on a ship bound for South America. I have heard there are opportunities there for women willing to work, willing to start over with nothing but their determination. I know this sounds foolish. What does a girl from Connecticut know of life in Argentina or Brazil? But William, anything is better than remaining here. I have left behind everything that connected me to the Hartwell name. Everything except this letter and the hope that someday you might understand why I had to disappear. If God is merciful, I will find a way to build a new life, perhaps even find love with someone who sees me as more than property to be managed. Please do not try to find me. Please do not ask Mother about what happened here. She made her choice when she accepted Edmund's offer, and I have made mine. Remember me as I was when we were children, running along the beach in Mystic, collecting shells and pretending we were pirates searching for treasure. If I am blessed with children in this new life, I will tell them about their Uncle William, about the brother who was brave enough to cross an ocean to make his own way in the world. And perhaps, if fortune smiles upon us both, our paths will cross again someday. Until then, know that I carry your love with me wherever I go. Your devoted sister, Anna. Tom's voice trailed off as he reached the end of the letter. The silence in the kitchen seemed to expand, filled with the weight of Anna's words and the decades they had traveled to reach this moment. The pocket watch lay open beside the unfolded pages, its stopped hands catching the morning light, though the phantom ticking continued its steady rhythm. Uncle Harold had grown very still during the reading, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the table. His eyes were fixed not on the letter, but on the watch, and Tom could see something like recognition dawning in his expression. "The watch," Harold said quietly. "I remember William mentioning his father's watch once, said it had been lost in the post, along with other important things."
"Anna," Harold said quietly, as though testing the name on his tongue. "I remember now. There were whispers when I was young. Something about William's sister, something that had gone wrong in America, but the family never spoke of it directly." Tom carefully refolded the letter, his mind racing with questions and images. He could almost see her, this young woman standing on a dock in New York Harbor, watching ships and wrestling with a decision that would change her life forever. The desperation in her words, the careful way she had explained without fully explaining what had driven her to such a drastic choice. She never made it to England, Tom said, more to himself than to his uncle. "No," Harold agreed, "and William never knew why she stopped writing." but there was something in his uncle's tone, a careful neutrality that suggested he might know more than he was willing to share. Tom looked up at the older man, studying his face for clues, while the phantom ticking of the stopped watch seemed to grow more insistent. "Uncle Harold," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "what else do you know about this family? About William and Anna?" The question felt dangerous even as he spoke it, as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff, about to discover whether the ground beneath his feet was solid or mere illusion. Part of him wanted to take it back, to fold the letter away and pretend this morning had never happened. The life he had built with Harold was comfortable, predictable, safe. What if the truth destroyed all of that? The question hung in the air between them, and Tom watched as Harold's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, consideration, and something that might have been fear. "Nothing that would matter now," Harold said finally. "Ancient history, Tom, best left buried." Tom was 12 years old, and 12-year-olds have a talent for recognizing when adults are keeping secrets. As he held Anna's letter in his hands, feeling the weight of her long-ago decision, he understood that this was not ancient history at all. This was a mystery that had been waiting 47 years for someone to solve it. But with that understanding came fear. What if he discovered something terrible? What if William had secrets that would change how Tom saw him? What if Harold had been lying about their family history? The phantom ticking of the watch seemed to echo his heartbeat, measuring out moments of decision. And perhaps, he thought, with a flutter of excitement and deep gnawing trepidation, he was meant to be that someone, even if it meant risking everything he thought he knew about the people he loved. The gaslight flickered against the walls of the boarding house room as Anna Hartwell pressed the pen to paper for what she hoped would be the final time. Outside her window, the sounds of New York Harbor drifted up from the docks, the deep horns of steamships, the shouts of longshoremen, the creak and groan of cargo being loaded for journeys to distant shores. She had been writing this letter for 3 hours, starting over each time her courage faltered, each time the words seemed inadequate to carry the weight of what she needed to say. The small trunk at the foot of her bed contained everything she would take with her: a few dresses, some undergarments, her mother's silver locket, and the Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything else would remain behind, including the life she had been born to live. The marriage certificate lay on the writing desk beside the letter, the ink still fresh from that morning's ceremony. Mrs. Anna Ashworth, it read, though she had never felt less like a wife than she did in that moment. Edmund had been attentive during the brief service, playing the role of devoted husband for the witnesses and the minister, but the moment they had returned to his house, their house now, legally speaking, his mask had begun to slip. It had started with small things, the way he instructed the servants to refer to her only as Mrs. Ashworth, as though her first name had been erased along with her maiden status. The locks he had installed on the doors of certain rooms she was told were not for ladies to concern themselves with. The careful way he counted the money in his wallet each evening, as though inventory needed to be taken of every penny. But it was the conversation she had overheard through the library door that had crystallized her decision to flee.
Edmund speaking with his business partner, Mr. Caldwell, about investments in the next generation and ensuring the bloodline produces profitable returns. They had spoken of her as though she were a broodmare, discussing the children she might bear in terms of their potential value to Edmund's expanding business empire. "The girl is young enough to give me 4 or 5 sons, and if she proves difficult to manage, well, there are remedies for that. My first wife learned to be quite cooperative once she understood the alternatives." Anna had pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Edmund's first wife had died in childbirth 2 years ago. At least, that was the official story. But the way he spoke of remedies and alternatives suggested a darker truth behind that tragedy.
That night, while Edmund slept in what he had declared to be his bedroom, Anna had packed her small trunk and written her letter to William. She had saved enough money from her dowry, money Edmund didn't yet know existed, to book passage on a ship bound for Buenos Aires. Argentina was far enough away that he would never think to look for her there. And she had heard there were opportunities for women willing to work as governesses or companions to wealthy families. As she sealed the envelope with wax, Anna could hear the watch ticking steadily on the desk, time moving forward, carrying her toward an unknown future, but also away from an unbearable past. She placed the watch carefully inside the envelope with the letter, knowing that William would understand the significance. Their father had always said the watch would find its way to the right person at the right time. "Let it measure new beginnings," she whispered as she closed the envelope, unaware that the watch would stop ticking the moment her ship cleared New York Harbor, as though it were keeping time with a heart that was breaking but not quite ready to surrender hope. But William had always been different. He had left Connecticut to make his own way in the world, despite their father's objections and their mother's tears. If anyone could understand the choice she was making, it would be her brother. The boarding house clock chimed midnight as Anna made her way down the narrow stairs, her trunk in one hand and the letter in the other. The night clerk barely glanced up as she passed through the lobby. Young women departing at odd hours were not unusual in this part of the city. The post office night window was still open, staffed by a sleepy clerk who processed her letter with mechanical efficiency. Anna paid the international postage and watched as her final connection to her old life disappeared into a canvas mail sack. 3 hours later, as the SS Patagonia pulled away from the pier, with Anna standing at its rail, the letter was already beginning its journey toward England. She watched the lights of New York Harbor fade into the pre-dawn darkness and whispered a prayer that William would receive her words safely, that he would remember her with love rather than judgment. What she could not know, as the ship carried her toward an uncertain but hopeful future, was that her letter would never reach its destination. A sorting error in the London postal system would send it into a forgotten corner of a warehouse, where it would wait nearly half a century for a second chance at delivery. But that night, standing on the deck of a steamship bound for South America, Anna Hartwell, who would soon become Anna Santos, and later Anna Martinez, and eventually Anna Reyes, believed her message would find its way home. She believed William would understand, and in believing,
she found the courage to face whatever waited for her beyond the horizon.
The days following the letter's arrival passed slowly for Tom, though his mind raced with questions that seemed to multiply each time he reread Anna's words or held his father's watch up to the light. He had taken to carrying the timepiece with him everywhere, though its hands remained frozen at 11:47. The phantom ticking had become his constant companion, sometimes loud enough to drown out other sounds, sometimes so soft he wondered if he was imagining it. But there were moments, usually when he was alone and thinking deeply about Anna's story, when the ticking seemed to sync perfectly with his own heartbeat, as though the watch were somehow alive and trying to tell him something. Uncle Harold had grown increasingly uncomfortable whenever Tom brought up the subject of Anna or William. Their conversations took on a strained quality, with Harold deflecting questions and changing the subject whenever possible. It was clear that he knew more than he was willing to share, but Tom had learned that direct questioning would only make his uncle more defensive. Instead, Tom decided to conduct his own investigation, though every step forward felt like walking deeper into a forest where he might become lost forever. The watch's phantom ticking followed him everywhere, to the records office, the library, through conversations with neighbors. Sometimes he wondered if he was losing his mind, hearing sounds that weren't there. But then he would touch the watch in his pocket and feel its weight, solid and real, and know that some mysteries demanded to be solved, regardless of the cost. Each new piece of information felt like a test of his courage. Did he really want to know why William had spent years searching for Anna? Did he really want to understand what secrets might be hidden in his own family history? The comfortable life he shared with Harold seemed more precious now that he realized how easily it could be shattered by the truth. His first stop was the town records office, housed in the basement of the municipal building. Mrs. Granger, the town clerk, was a severe woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for knowing where every document in her domain could be found. She looked up from her ledgers with obvious annoyance when Tom appeared at her counter. "What do you want, boy?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm looking for information about my great-uncle William Hartwell," Tom said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "He lived here until about 15 years ago." Mrs. Granger's expression shifted slightly, and Tom caught a flicker of something that might have been recognition. "William Hartwell, you say? What sort of information?" "Anything, really. Where he lived, what he did for work, maybe something about his family in America." The woman was quiet for a long moment, studying Tom with eyes that seemed to see more than he was comfortable with. Finally, she disappeared into the stacks of filing cabinets that lined the room's back wall. When she returned, she carried a thick folder stuffed with various documents.
"William Hartwell," she said, opening the folder on the counter. "Arrived in Whitmore in 1902. Purchased the cottage on Seagrass Lane from the Pemberton family. Listed his occupation as mariner, though he never sailed after settling here. Worked various jobs, lighthouse keeper for a time, then at the harbour master's office." Tom leaned forward eagerly. "What about his family? Did he ever mention a sister?" Mrs. Granger's finger traced down a page of handwritten notes. "There's mention here of inquiries he made about postal deliveries from America. Seems he was expecting correspondence that never arrived. Made quite a fuss about it, actually. Came in here every few months for years, asking if there might be letters held up somewhere. For how long? According to these notes, from 1903 until about 1910. Then he stopped asking. She looked up at Tom with an expression that had softened slightly. "You're Harold's boy, aren't you? The one who came to live with him after the influenza?" Tom nodded. "Did you know my great-uncle William?" "Oh yes," Mrs. Granger said, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "He was a gentleman, always polite and well-spoken, but there was a sadness about him, especially in those early years, like a man carrying a weight he couldn't put down." She turned a few more pages in the folder, then paused. "There's something else here, a record of a visit he made to the constabulary in 1908. Wanted to know about hiring someone to trace a missing person in America, a woman named Anna." Tom's heart began to race. What happened with that? Constable Davis, this was long before Constable Miller's time, told him it wasn't the sort of thing local police could help with, suggested he contact the American authorities directly, but apparently nothing came of it. Mrs. Granger closed the folder and handed it to Tom. "You can look through this if you like. Just return it when you're finished." Tom spent the next hour poring over the documents, piecing together a picture of his great-uncle's life in Whitmer. William had been well regarded in the community, known for his reliability and quiet dignity. But the records also painted a picture of a man haunted by unanswered questions, someone who never quite settled into the life he had built. One document in particular caught Tom's attention. A letter William had written to the postmaster in 1906, inquiring about the possibility that mail from America might have been misdirected. The formal language couldn't quite hide the desperation underneath. "I remain hopeful that correspondence from my sister in New York might have been delayed rather than lost entirely. Any assistance in locating such mail would be most gratefully received." As Tom read these words, he could almost feel his great-uncle's frustration and growing despair. William had spent years waiting for a letter that was sitting in a London warehouse, gathering dust and slowly fading.
Anna's words of love and explanation had been traveling in circles, while William wondered why his sister had abandoned him so completely.
When Tom returned the folder to Mrs. Granger, she studied his face with keen interest. "Found what you were looking for?" "Some of it," Tom replied. "Mrs. Granger, do you remember anyone ever talking about what happened to William's sister? Why she stopped writing to him?" The older woman leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "There were rumors, of course. Small towns always have rumors about things like that. Some said she'd married badly and was too ashamed to maintain contact. Others whispered about trouble with the law or debts or, well, you know how people talk. What did you think?" Mrs. Granger was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "I thought William Hartwell was a good man who deserved better than to spend his life wondering why someone he loved had disappeared without explanation. And I think," she added, looking directly at Tom, "that sometimes letters find their way home exactly when they're meant to, even if it's not when we expect them to." As Tom left the municipal building, Anna's letter carefully tucked in his jacket pocket, he felt the weight of a mystery that had been decades in the making. But he also felt something else, a growing certainty that the story was not finished, that there were still secrets waiting to be uncovered. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this mystery might be more personal than he had initially imagined.
Tom's next stop was the Whitmore Public Library, a small but well-maintained building that served as the town's unofficial repository of local history. The librarian, Miss Catherine Thornley, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of the town's past. She greeted Tom warmly when he approached her desk. "Thomas Hartwell," she said with a smile. "I don't often see you in here. What brings you to the library today?" "I'm researching my family history, Miss Thornley, specifically my great-uncle William Hartwell. I was hoping you might have some local newspapers or records from when he lived here." Miss Thornley's expression brightened with interest. "Oh, what a fascinating project. Yes, we do have quite a collection of local materials. Let me show you to our historical section." She led him to a quiet corner of the library, where bound volumes of the Whitmore Gazette sat on sturdy wooden shelves. The newspapers dated back to 1895, their pages yellowed with age but still readable. "What time period are you most interested in?" "From about 1902 to 1920, I think." As Tom began his search through the newspaper archives, Miss Thornley returned to her desk but kept a watchful eye on him. She had always taken a special interest in the orphaned boy, recognizing in him the same love of learning that had driven her own career choice. Tom found his first mention of William Hartwell in a 1903 edition of the Gazette. It was a small item in the social column noting that Mr. William Hartwell, recently arrived from America, has taken up residence on Seagrass Lane. Mr. Hartwell brings with him considerable experience in maritime affairs and has expressed interest in contributing to our local harbor operations. Over the next several newspapers, Tom found scattered references to his great-uncle's life in Whitmore. William had indeed worked as a lighthouse keeper for 3 years before moving to the harbor master's office. He had been active in the local Methodist church and had served on the town council for 2 terms. By all accounts, he had been a model citizen.
But it was an obituary from 1933 that provided the most intriguing information. The piece was longer than most, suggesting that William had been well respected in the community. Mr. William Hartwell, 67, passed away peacefully at his home on Seagrass Lane after a brief illness. Mr. Hartwell came to our town from America in 1902 and quickly established himself as a valued member of our community. He served faithfully as lighthouse keeper and later as assistant harbor master, positions that suited his extensive knowledge of nautical matters. Those who knew Mr. Hartwell will remember him as a gentleman of quiet dignity, who carried himself with the bearing of one who had seen much of the world. He never married, though it was widely known that he maintained hope throughout his life of reuniting with family members from whom he had become separated. Mr. Hartwell was preceded in death by his parents and is survived by various cousins and distant relations. He has left his cottage and its contents to his nephew, Harold Hartwell, with the request that certain personal items be preserved for future generations
who might wish to understand the full story. Services will be held at Whitmore Methodist Church on Thursday at 2 o'clock. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Whitmore Orphans Fund, a cause that was particularly dear to Mr. Hartwell's heart. Tom read the obituary 3 times, his attention caught by several important details. William had died hoping to reunite with separated family members. Clearly, he had never stopped wondering about Anna. The reference to leaving personal items for future generations who might wish to understand the full story suggested that William had known there were secrets yet to be uncovered. And most intriguingly, his great-uncle had been particularly concerned with orphans, a detail that seemed to resonate with Tom's own circumstances. "Miss Thornley," he called softly. When the librarian approached, he pointed to the obituary. "This mentions that my great-uncle left some personal items to be preserved. Would you know anything about what happened to those?" Miss Thornley read over the obituary, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You know, I do remember something about this. When Harold inherited the cottage, there were boxes of papers and personal effects that he brought here for safekeeping. They're still in our storage room, actually. Harold said he didn't have space for everything and asked if we could hold them until someone in the family showed interest in William's history."
Tom's pulse quickened. "Could I see those boxes?" "I don't see why not, given that you're family. Let me check with Harold first, though, just to be proper about it." While Miss Thornley telephoned the bakery, Tom's mind raced with possibilities. What had William preserved? What full story had he wanted future generations to understand? When Miss Thornley returned, her expression was puzzled. "That's odd," she said. "Harold seemed quite agitated about my call. He said the boxes weren't important, just old papers and nonsense that should probably be disposed of. He was quite insistent that you not bother with them." This response only intensified Tom's curiosity. Why would Uncle Harold be so adamant about keeping him away from William's belongings? What was in those boxes that his uncle didn't want him to see? "Miss Thornley," Tom said carefully, "as William's great-nephew, would I have the right to examine those items even if Harold objects?" The librarian considered this for a moment. Legally speaking, Harold inherited everything, so it would be his decision. But morally, she paused, studying Tom's face. "You're old enough to be curious about your family's history, and it seems to me that William specifically wanted these things preserved for future generations. Perhaps there's a compromise to be found." "What do you mean?" Miss Thornley glanced around the library to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Harold works every morning until noon at the bakery. If you were to come by tomorrow around 10 o'clock, I might be able to show you what's in those boxes, just to satisfy your natural curiosity about your heritage. What Harold doesn't know won't hurt him, and it would fulfill William's stated wishes." Tom felt a mix of excitement and guilt. He didn't like the idea of going behind his uncle's back, but his need to understand a truth about Anna's letter and its connection to his own life was becoming overwhelming. "Thank you, Miss Thornley," he said. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." As he walked home through the gathering dusk,
Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was approaching something significant, perhaps even dangerous. Uncle Harold's reaction to the mention of William's papers had been telling. There was definitely something in those boxes that his uncle wanted to keep hidden. But Tom was no longer just a curious boy investigating a family mystery. Anna's letter had awakened in him something, a sense that his story was somehow intertwined with hers, that the secrets of the past might hold the key to understanding his present. Tomorrow, he would finally learn what William Hartwell had wanted future generations to know, and perhaps, in doing so, he would discover why a letter that took 47 years to arrive felt so intimately connected to his own life.
Tom barely slept that night, his mind churning with anticipation and a growing sense of dread about what he might discover in William's preserved belongings. The phantom ticking of the watch seemed louder in the darkness, measuring out the hours until morning with relentless precision. He lay in his narrow attic bed, listening to the familiar sounds of Uncle Harold moving about the bakery below, and wondered if this might be one of the last nights when those sounds brought him comfort. What if William's papers revealed something horrible? What if Harold had been protecting him from painful truths? The boy who had started this investigation out of simple curiosity was now walking toward revelations that might change everything, and with each step, the weight of potential loss grew heavier. When morning came, Tom forced himself to maintain his usual routine. He helped Uncle Harold with the early customers, swept the shop floor, and arranged the day's fresh loaves in the display case. But all the while, his attention was focused on the clock above the register, watching as it slowly approached 10 o'clock. "I'm going to the library," Tom announced as the morning rush began to slow. Uncle Harold looked up sharply from the cash drawer he was organizing. "The library? What for?" "Just some reading," Tom replied, trying to keep his voice casual. "Miss Thornley suggested some books that might interest me." For a moment, Tom thought his uncle might object or ask more probing questions, but Harold simply nodded and returned to his work, though Tom noticed the older man's hands seemed less steady as he counted the morning's receipts. The walk to the library felt longer than usual, as though each step carried the weight of decades. When Tom arrived, Miss Thornley was waiting for him with a conspiratorial smile and a ring of keys in her hand. "I've been thinking about this all night," she said, leading him toward a narrow staircase at the back of the building. Whatever's in those boxes, William clearly felt it was important enough to preserve. You have a right to know your family's history. The library's storage room was cramped and dimly lit, filled with stacks of outdated books, old furniture, and several wooden crates of various sizes. Miss Thornley led him to a corner where 3 medium-sized boxes sat on a metal shelf, each one carefully labeled in William's neat handwriting: personal correspondence, documents and photographs, and Anna. Tom's breath caught when he saw that third label. William had dedicated an entire box to his sister, maintaining hope for 47 years
that someday someone would understand what had happened to her.
"I'll leave you to examine these privately," Miss Thornley said. "Take your time and let me know if you need anything." Tom began with the box labeled Documents and Photographs. Inside, he found a carefully organized collection of William's life in Whitmore: property deeds, employment records, church membership certificates, and dozens of photographs chronicling his years in the coastal town. The pictures showed a man who had aged gracefully, but never lost a certain sadness around his eyes, as though he were always looking toward a horizon that remained just out of reach. One photograph in particular caught Tom's attention. It showed William standing beside a young woman and a small child, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, outside the cottage on Seagrass Lane. On the back, in William's handwriting, was the inscription, "With Margaret and little Thomas, summer 1936. Tom stared at the photograph, his mind reeling. The child in the picture bore a striking resemblance to his own childhood photographs, and the name, Thomas. Could this be connected to him somehow? But his parents had told him he was named after his grandfather, not some distant relative. The box of personal correspondence revealed William's methodical approach to maintaining connections with his scattered family. There were letters from cousins in various parts of England, responses to his inquiries about Anna's whereabouts, and copies of the letters he had sent to American authorities seeking information about his sister. Reading through them, Tom could trace William's growing desperation over the years, his hope slowly giving way to resignation. But it was the third box, the one simply labeled Anna, that contained the most revelatory materials. Inside, Tom found copies of every letter Anna had sent to William before her marriage, dating back to their childhood. Her early letters were full of sisterly affection and vivid descriptions of life in Connecticut. But as she grew older, subtle notes of concern began to creep into her writing. In a letter from 1900, Anna had written, "Mother has been meeting with several gentlemen about my future, and I confess I am growing anxious about her intentions. I fear she sees me more as a commodity to be traded than as a daughter whose happiness should matter." Another letter from early 1901 was more explicit. "The marriage Mother has arranged fills me with dread, William. Mr. Ashworth is wealthy and respectable, but there is something in his manner that frightens me. He speaks of wives as though they were possessions, and I have heard disturbing rumors about what happened to his first wife. I pray daily for the courage to follow your example and make my own way in the world."
But the most shocking discovery came near the bottom of the box. A collection of documents that William had somehow acquired years after Anna's disappearance. There were shipping manifests showing an A. Hartwell departing New York aboard the SS Patagonia in October 1901, bound for Buenos Aires. There were copies of marriage certificates from Argentina showing Anna Santos, formerly Anna Hartwell, marrying a rancher named Roberto Martinez in 1903. And there, in a manila envelope marked "For Thomas, when he is old enough to understand," Tom found the most stunning revelation of all. Inside the envelope were birth certificates, one from Argentina in 1904, showing the birth of a son to Ana Martinez, née Hartwell, and Roberto Martinez. The child's name was listed as William Martinez, but paper-clipped to this document was another birth certificate, this one from England in 1905, showing the birth of Thomas William Hartwell to Margaret Hartwell and father unknown. Tom's hands trembled as he read the accompanying letter, and for the first time since finding Anna's letter, the phantom ticking of the watch fell silent. In that sudden quiet, he could hear his own rapid breathing, the creak of the building settling, the distant sound of Miss Thornley's footsteps upstairs. It was as though the watch had finally delivered the message it had been carrying for 47 years.
If you are reading this, Thomas, then you are old enough to learn the truth that I have carried alone for so many years. Your mother, Margaret, was not married when she gave birth to you, and the father listed as unknown on your birth certificate was a deliberate deception. Margaret came to me in the spring of 1905, desperate and frightened, carrying a child she could not keep. She had worked as a governess for a wealthy family in London, and the master of that house had taken advantage of her position. When her condition became apparent, she was dismissed without reference and found herself with nowhere to turn. I took her in because she reminded me of Anna, young, frightened, abandoned by those who should have protected her. But as the months passed, I began to suspect there was more to her story than she was willing to tell. It was only after Margaret's death from consumption in 1907 that I learned the full truth. Among her possessions, I found letters that revealed she had indeed been employed as a governess, but not in London. She had been working for a family in Buenos Aires, where she had met and befriended a young woman named Ana Martinez, formerly Anna Hartwell. My sister Anna had taken Margaret under her protection when Margaret found herself in trouble with her employer. When her condition became apparent, she was dismissed without reference and found herself with nowhere to turn. I took her in because she reminded me of Anna, young, frightened, abandoned by those who should have protected her. But as the months passed, I began to suspect there was more to her story than she was willing to tell. Thomas, I believe, though I cannot prove, that you are not just any orphaned child who came into my care. I believe you are Anna's son, born in Argentina, but brought to England by a woman who loved your mother enough to risk everything to save you both. The dates align, the circumstances fit, and there is something about your features, the shape of your eyes, the way you hold your head when you're thinking, that reminds me so strongly of Anna as a child. Margaret may have been your mother in all the ways that matter. She loved you, cared for you, gave her life to protect yours. But I believe Anna Hartwell was your grandmother, and that makes you my great-nephew
in more ways than even Harold realizes. I have never told Harold this suspicion because I feared what he might do with the knowledge. He is a good man, but a simple one, and the complexities of your origins might have led him to make choices that were not in your best interest. But I wanted you to know, when you were old enough to understand, that you are connected to a woman who was brave enough to cross an ocean to escape an intolerable situation and generous enough to help others do the same. Anna's letter, if it ever arrives, will tell you of her courage in leaving America, but this letter tells you of her continued courage in helping others find freedom even in her exile. You are the child of two remarkable women, Thomas, and the inheritor of a legacy of strength that I hope will serve you well in whatever life you choose to build.
Tom set the letter down with shaking hands, his entire understanding of his identity rewritten in the space of a few paragraphs. In the sudden silence, for the phantom ticking had completely stopped, he could hear his own heartbeat, rapid and irregular, as though trying to find a new rhythm to match this new reality. Margaret, whom he had always believed to be his mother, had been his protector, but not his birth parent. Anna, the mysterious woman who had written so desperately to William, had been his grandmother. And somewhere in Argentina, there might still be family he had never known existed. But more than that, the watch in his pocket, silent now for the first time since its arrival, seemed to have completed some cosmic circuit. The timepiece that had stopped ticking when Anna's ship left New York Harbor had carried its message across decades, waiting for the moment when her grandson would finally understand the full weight of the love and sacrifice that had shaped his life. The implications cascaded through his mind. Uncle Harold wasn't truly his uncle at all, but rather a distant cousin who had taken in what he believed to be an orphaned relation. The cottage on Seagrass Lane, where William had lived, might rightfully belong to him as William's actual heir. And the letter that had arrived 47 years late wasn't just a piece of family history. It was a message from his own grandmother, finally reaching the descendant she had never known she had. Tom thought about Anna's words about hoping to have children in her new life, children to whom she would tell stories about their Uncle William. She had fulfilled that promise in a way she could never have imagined. Her son had grown up in Argentina, but her grandson had found his way to William's town, William's family, William's legacy. As he sat in the dusty storage room, surrounded by the carefully preserved evidence of his family's hidden history, Tom understood why Uncle Harold had been so reluctant to let him explore William's belongings. Harold might not have known the full truth, but he certainly suspected that Tom's connection to the family was more complicated than it appeared. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted his thoughts. Miss Thornley appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Thomas, you've been down here for quite some time. Is everything all right?" Tom looked up at her, the weight of the silent watch heavy in his pocket, still processing the enormity of what he had discovered. The phantom ticking that had been his companion for days was gone, replaced by a profound quiet that felt both peaceful and terrifying.
"Miss Thornley," he said slowly, "if someone discovered they weren't who they thought they were, if they learned their entire family history was different from what they'd been told, what should they do with that knowledge?" The librarian studied his face carefully, noting the shock and confusion in his expression. "That would depend," she said gently,
on whether the truth would help them or harm them, and whether it would help or harm others. What if the truth means that other people have been lying to them, even with good intentions? Miss Thornley stepped into the storage room and sat on a nearby crate, bringing herself to Tom's eye level. Sometimes adults keep secrets from children not out of malice, but out of love. They want to protect them from pain or confusion or circumstances they're not ready to handle. But there comes a time when every person has the right to know their own story, even if it's complicated or difficult. Tom gestured toward the boxes and the scattered papers around him. What if someone's entire life had been built on a foundation of well-meaning lies? What if the truth changed everything they thought they knew about themselves? Then, Miss Thornley said quietly, they would have to decide whether to live with the truth or continue accepting the lie. And either choice would be valid, Thomas. Knowledge doesn't always make life easier, but it does make it more honest. As Tom began carefully returning the documents to their boxes, he realized that his investigation had led him far beyond the simple mystery of Anna's delayed letter. He had uncovered a web of connections, sacrifices, and protective deceptions that spanned 3 generations and 2 continents. Anna's letter had finally reached its destination, but not in the way she had intended. Instead of informing William about her decision to flee America, it had revealed to her own grandson the courage and compassion that had shaped her family's hidden history. Now Tom faced a choice that Anna herself would have understood: whether to confront the truth openly with all its complications, or to protect the carefully constructed peace that Harold had built around their quiet life in Whitmore. But as he held Anna's original letter in one hand and William's revelations in the other, Tom knew that some truths were too important to remain buried. Anna had risked everything to escape a life built on lies. Perhaps it was time for her grandson to follow her example and embrace the complexity of his real story.
Tom spent the rest of that day walking the familiar streets of Whitmore, but seeing them with entirely new eyes. The watch lay silent in his pocket, no longer ticking, as though it had finally completed the task it had carried for nearly half a century. Every landmark held different meaning now. The cottage on Seagrass Lane wasn't just where his great-uncle had lived, but where his own grandmother's brother had spent decades waiting for word that would never come. But it was the silence where the ticking used to be that affected him most. For days, that phantom rhythm had been his constant companion, measuring out his heartbeats as he drew closer to the truth. Now that he knew everything, the absence of that sound felt like losing a friend who had guided him safely through the darkness. By evening, he had made his decision. The truth, however complicated, deserved to be spoken. Uncle Harold was closing the bakery when Tom returned, counting the day's receipts with his usual methodical care. The older man looked up as Tom entered, and something in the boy's expression made him pause in his calculations. "You were gone a long time today," Harold observed, his tone carefully neutral. "I was at the library," Tom replied, settling into the chair across from Harold's small desk. "Miss Thornley showed me some things that belonged to Great-Uncle William." Harold's hands stilled on the ledger book. For a long moment, neither spoke.
the silence filled with decades of unspoken knowledge. "Did she now?" Harold said finally. "And what sorts of things did you find?" Tom reached into his jacket and withdrew Anna's letter, placing it gently on the desk between them. "I found out why this letter was so important, and I found out who I really am." Harold stared at the letter as though it were a serpent that might strike at any moment. His face had gone pale, and Tom could see the rapid pulse at his temple. In the silence between them, the absence of the watch's phantom ticking felt profound, as though time itself were holding its breath. "Tom," Harold said slowly, and his voice carried the weight of years of careful protection. "Some things are better left buried. William thought I had the right to know the truth when I was old enough to understand it," Tom interrupted, his voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. He pulled the silent watch from his pocket, its gold surface catching the lamplight. "He left me this, along with a letter explaining everything. About Anna, about Margaret, about who my real family is."
Harold's eyes fixed on the watch, and Tom saw something like recognition dawn in his expression. "The ticking," Harold whispered. "You've been hearing it, haven't you? William mentioned he said the watch would start ticking again when it found its way to the right person." "It stopped," Tom said quietly. "Just now, when I read William's letter. It's been ticking for days, but now—" He held up the timepiece, and in the lamplight they both could see that its hands had moved. No longer frozen at 11:47, they now showed the correct time, moving steadily forward with each passing second. Harold closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "So now you know. I know that Margaret wasn't really my mother, though she loved me like one. I know that Anna was my grandmother, not just some distant relative. I know that you've been caring for a child who isn't really your nephew, even though you've never made me feel like anything other than family." Harold opened his eyes and looked directly at Tom, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "And what do you intend to do with this knowledge?" Tom considered the question carefully. He thought about Anna, fleeing across an ocean to escape a life that would have destroyed her spirit. He thought about Margaret, sacrificing everything to protect a child who wasn't biologically her own. He thought about William, carrying secrets for decades to preserve the peace and safety of others. "I intend to honor it," Tom said finally. Anna was brave enough to start over when her old life became unbearable. Margaret was generous enough to risk everything to help someone else's child. William was wise enough to preserve the truth while protecting me from it until I was ready. And you've been kind enough to raise a boy who had no real claim on your affection." Harold's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "You've always been family to me, Tom. Blood or no blood. You've been the son I never had." "I know that," Tom replied, reaching across the desk to place his hand over Harold's weathered one. "But I also need to understand the rest of my story. Anna wrote about hoping her children would know about their Uncle William. She couldn't have known that her grandson would actually grow up in William's town, but somehow that's exactly what happened." Harold nodded slowly. William always believed there were no coincidences when it came to family. He said you ending up here with us
was Anna's influence reaching across the years.
"Do you think she might still be alive?" Tom asked, voicing the question that had been haunting him all day. Anna would be, what, in her 60s now? And if she had children in Argentina? "I don't know," Harold admitted. "William tried for years to trace her, but after she remarried and changed her name, the trail went cold." "But Tom," he paused, studying the boy's face, "are you thinking of trying to find her?" Tom was quiet for a moment, considering the enormity of such an undertaking. Then, in the silence where the phantom ticking used to be, he heard his own voice speaking words that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "Some letters don't just carry messages, they carry time itself." The phrase hung in the air between them, startling Tom with its certainty. He wasn't sure where the words had come from, but they felt true in a way that went beyond understanding. Harold smiled, for the first time since the conversation began. "You sound like William when you talk like that. He always said time had its own wisdom about when people were ready for certain truths." Tom picked up Anna's letter, holding it carefully, as he had learned to hold all precious things. "There's something else I want to do. Anna wrote this letter believing William would receive it, believing he would understand why she had to leave. She never knew that he spent his whole life wondering what happened to her, never knew that he tried to find her, never knew that he forgave her long before he understood what she needed forgiveness for." "What are you thinking?" "I want to write her a letter back, even if I can't send it, even if I never find her. I want to put words on paper that William never got to say. I want to tell her that her message finally reached home, that her brother understood, that her courage wasn't wasted." Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened the ledger drawer and withdrew a piece of the bakery's best stationery. "Then you'd better write it properly," he said, handing Tom a fountain pen. "Anna deserves to know that her family remembers her with love, not judgment." As Tom began to write, the watch ticked steadily beside him on the table. No longer a phantom sound, but real and present, measuring out moments of connection across time. Harold quietly went about the evening routine of closing the bakery, but every few minutes he would glance over at the boy, his nephew, his son, his family, regardless of the complicated truth, and listen to the gentle rhythm of the timepiece that had finally found its purpose. Outside, the evening tide was coming in, and the sound of waves against the harbor wall harmonized with the watch's steady ticking. Time was moving forward again, carrying them all toward whatever came next. Somewhere across the Atlantic, in a country Tom had never seen, but that was part of his heritage, an old woman might be watching her own sunset, never knowing that the grandson she had never met was finally writing the reply her brother had never been able to send.
Letters Across Time. October 18th, 1948. Whitmore, England. My dear grandmother Anna, I hope it's all right that I call you that, though we have never met and you may never read these words. My name is Thomas Hartwell, and I am writing to you on behalf of your brother William, who can no longer speak for himself. 3 days ago, your letter, the one you wrote in 1901 before departing for South America, finally reached its destination. 47 years late, it was delivered to William's old address, where I now live with my Uncle Harold.
William himself passed away in 1933, but he never stopped believing that someday your words would find their way home. I need you to know that William understood. Even without receiving your letter, even without knowing the details of why you left so suddenly, he understood that you must have had good reasons for disappearing. He spent years trying to find you, not to bring you back to a life you had fled, but simply to know that you were safe and happy in whatever new world you had built. Your letter tells of your fear of Edmund Ashworth and your decision to sail for Argentina. I hope your courage was rewarded, Anna. I hope you found the new life you were seeking, the love you deserved, the freedom you sacrificed everything to claim. William kept every letter you sent before your marriage, and in them I can see the sister he remembered, intelligent, caring, full of dreams that seemed too large for the constraints placed upon you. He spoke often to the townspeople here about his sister who had been brave enough to cross an ocean to find her destiny. He was proud of you, Anna, even in his worry. There is something else you should know, something that William discovered but never had the chance to tell you. Your generosity in helping others, your willingness to aid a young woman named Margaret, who found herself in circumstances as desperate as your own, that kindness echoed forward in ways you could never have imagined. I am that echo, Anna. I am the child Margaret carried back to England with your help and blessing. Through a series of what some might call coincidences, I ended up in William's care, and eventually in his town. Your grandson found his way home to the brother you thought you would never see again. William suspected this truth, but never spoke it aloud until he left me a letter to be opened when I was old enough to understand. He wanted me to know that I was connected to a woman of extraordinary courage, that I carried the blood of someone who chose freedom over security, truth over comfort.
I want you to know that Margaret was a wonderful mother to me for the brief time we had together. She spoke of you often in her final months, telling me about the kind lady in Argentina who helped her when no one else would. She said you taught her that sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is let go. Let go of old hurts, old expectations, old definitions of what family must look like. Your letter asks William not to search for you, not to bring the shadow of your American life to his English doorstep. But Anna, you brought no shadows. You brought light, the light of possibility, of courage, of love that transcends distance and time. Your decision to help Margaret, help me, created a chain of connections that led your grandson home. I am 15 now, old enough to understand that life is rarely simple, that families are built as much on choice as on blood, that sometimes the greatest acts of love look like abandonment to those who don't understand the full story. I am learning Spanish, Anna, and saving money from my work at Harold's Bakery. Someday, when I am old enough to travel alone, I intend to visit Argentina. I want to walk the streets you walked, see the places where you built your new life, perhaps even find the family you created there. If you are still alive, and my heart tells me you are, I hope you will not be alarmed if a young man with William's eyes and your stubbornness appears at your door someday, carrying a letter that has traveled decades to find you.
I hope you have grandchildren who know stories about their brave grandmother who crossed an ocean. I hope you have found love that honors who you are, rather than trying to reshape you into someone else's vision. I hope your life in Argentina has been everything your life in America could not be. William never married Anna, but his life was not empty. He filled it with service to his community, kindness to strangers, and hope that someday his family would be whole again. In a way, that hope has been fulfilled. Through me, through the strange journey that brought your grandson home, William's family is whole. The letter you wrote 47 years ago was not lost, Anna. It was simply traveling a longer road than you expected, gathering meaning with each passing year until it could arrive at exactly the moment when someone was ready to understand not just your words, but the love and courage behind them. From your brother, William, who forgave you before he knew what needed forgiving, who loved you beyond the silence, who carried your memory like a candle that never went out. From your grandson, Thomas, who will spend his life living up to the legacy of strength you left him, who will carry your story forward with pride and gratitude. We are your family, Anna, scattered across decades and continents, but connected by bonds stronger than distance or time. Your letter has come home, and someday, God willing, we will find our way to you. Until then, know that you are remembered. Know that you are loved. Know that your courage changed everything for all of us. With devotion across the years, Thomas William Hartwell, grandson of Anna, great-nephew of William, keeper of letters, guardian of stories, Whitmore, England.
Tom finished writing as the last light faded from the October sky. Harold had long since finished the evening cleanup and was sitting quietly in his chair, respecting the solemnity of Tom's task. When the boy finally set down his pen, Harold approached and read the letter over his shoulder. "That's beautiful, Tom," Harold said softly. "William would be proud." Tom carefully folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, addressing it to Anna Hartwell Martinez Reyes, or whoever you have become, somewhere in Argentina, with love across time. He sealed it with wax, using the same care Anna had shown with her original letter. "I'm going to keep this," Tom said, "until some day when I can deliver it properly. And I'm going to put Anna's letter in a place of honor, not hidden away like it was for 47 years, but displayed where it can remind me every day that courage creates connections we never expect." Harold nodded approvingly. "And what about the rest of it? What about the truth of who you are and where you came from?" Tom thought for a moment, then smiled, a smile that carried traces of both William's gentleness and Anna's determination. "I think the truth is that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Anna's courage brought me here. Margaret's love protected me. William's wisdom guided me, and your kindness gave me a home. That's not a simple story, but it's a true one." As they locked up the bakery and climbed the stairs to their living quarters,
Tom carried both letters with him, along with the watch that now ticked with quiet confidence in his pocket. Tomorrow, he would do something that felt both necessary and deeply symbolic. He would visit William's grave in the Whitmore Cemetery and read both letters aloud, ensuring that his great-uncle finally heard the words Anna had written so long ago. And there, beside William's headstone, he would bury a copy of his own letter, sealing it in a small metal box along with one of Anna's photographs from William's collection, not to hide it, but to create a bridge between past and future, a time capsule that future generations might discover when they were ready to understand the full story. Some stories, Tom reflected as he drifted off to sleep, are too important to be forgotten again. Some letters carry messages that transcend their original purpose, becoming bridges between hearts separated by time and distance. And sometimes, the most important journey a letter can make is not from sender to recipient, but from past to future, carrying love and understanding to those who need it most. In his dreams that night, Tom heard the steady ticking of the watch, now synchronized with his own heartbeat. He saw Anna standing on a dock in Buenos Aires, her hair silver now, but her eyes still bright with the courage that had carried her across an ocean. She was holding an envelope, and she was smiling. And beside her stood William, younger than Tom had ever imagined him, holding a pocket watch that gleamed like gold in the South American sun. They were both looking toward the horizon, where a ship was approaching, a ship carrying letters that had finally found their way home.
20 years later, the cemetery in Whitmore was peaceful in the late afternoon light, its weathered headstones casting long shadows across the well-tended grass. Thomas Hartwell, now 32, a successful translator specializing in historical documents, knelt beside his great-uncle's grave, carefully placing fresh flowers next to the simple marble stone that read, William Hartwell, 1866 to 1933. He never stopped believing. From his jacket pocket, Tom withdrew a familiar weight, the gold pocket watch that had traveled from Anna to William to him, crossing decades and continents to complete its journey. The timepiece gleamed in the dying sunlight, its hands moving steadily forward with the same reliable rhythm it had maintained for 20 years. "I found her, William," Tom said softly, his words carried away by the evening breeze. "I found Anna. She's 87 now, living in Buenos Aires with more family than she ever dreamed possible. She kept the other half of Father's watch chain all these years, waiting for someone to claim the watch itself." He opened the timepiece, revealing an inscription on the inside cover that he had discovered during his visit to Argentina. "Time always brings us home. P.H." Below it, in Anna's careful script, was a newer addition, "To my grandson Thomas, who carried time itself across an ocean to find me." Tom smiled, remembering the moment when Anna had first heard the watch ticking in his pocket. The old woman had stopped speaking mid-sentence, her eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. When he had shown her the watch, she had burst into tears, not of sadness, but of joy, the profound joy of a mystery finally fully resolved. "She wrote you a letter back, you know," Tom continued,
speaking to the headstone as though William were sitting beside him. She wanted you to know that she never stopped thinking about you, never stopped hoping that someday her story would make sense to someone who loved her. He reached into his other pocket and withdrew an envelope. Its paper crisp and new, but sealed with the same careful attention Anna had shown nearly 70 years ago. This letter would join the small collection he had buried beside William's grave over the years, a correspondence between the past and the present, between the living and the dead, between hearts that had never stopped loving each other despite time and distance. As Tom placed the letter in the small metal box he had brought for this purpose, the watch in his palm seemed to tick a little louder, as though approving of this ritual of connection. He had performed this ceremony many times over the years, creating a bridge between the family he had found in Argentina and the family he had always known in England. Anna's descendants now knew about their English cousins, and Tom's children, when they came, would grow up knowing they belonged to a story that spanned continents and generations. The watch would continue its journey, carrying time forward into new hands, new hearts, new mysteries waiting to be solved.
Tom stood and walked to the cemetery's edge, where a new section had been prepared for future burials. Someday, he knew, he would rest here beside William, and the watch would find its way to another generation of Hartwells. Anna's great-grandchildren would learn to listen for its ticking, would understand that some objects carry more than time. They carry love, hope, and the unbreakable connections that make us family. As he walked back toward the town center, Tom could hear the evening bells of Whitmore Methodist Church beginning to chime the hour. The sound harmonized perfectly with the ticking of the watch in his pocket, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo across the decades, past to present, memory to hope, silence to story. Behind him, the shadows grew longer across William's grave, but the flowers Tom had left seemed to glow with their own light in the gathering dusk. And if someone had been listening carefully, they might have heard a sound like gentle laughter carried on the wind, the joy of a man who had waited 47 years for a letter, and 20 more for the assurance that love, like time itself, always finds a way to complete its journey home. The watch ticked on, steady and sure, measuring out the moments until the next letter would find its way to someone ready to understand that some stories are never really finished. They just wait patiently at the right station until it's time for the next passenger to board. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the harbor, carrying its own cargo of letters, memories, and dreams toward destinations unknown. And in the quiet of the English countryside, time itself seemed to pause for just a moment, not to stop the world, but to acknowledge that some journeys, no matter how long they take, are always worth completing. Anna's letter had taken 47 years to reach its destination. Tom's search for her had taken 20 more. But here, in this peaceful cemetery where William rested and where future generations would someday gather, the true message had finally been delivered in full. Love transcends time. Family transcends distance. And some stories are so powerful, so necessary, that they will wait decades for the right person to tell them. The pocket watch ticked once more, then fell silent, not broken, but complete. Its work was finished. Time had finally brought everyone home.
Algunas historias no fueron olvidadas, solamente se quedaron demasiado tiempo esperando en la estación equivocada.
Some stories were never forgotten. They just spent too long waiting at the wrong station. If you enjoyed this story, remember that every family has letters waiting to be discovered, watches that have stopped ticking at significant moments, and connections yearning to be made across the barriers of time itself. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we have with the past, and sometimes the most meaningful journeys are the ones that bring us home to people we've never met but have always known. Listen carefully to the sound of time passing around you. That gentle ticking might not be a clock at all. It might be a heart from another era, still keeping time, still waiting for someone brave enough to hear its story. Until our next forgotten story finds its way to the surface, keep listening for the whispers of history. They're always there, waiting for someone with the courage to hear them.
Anna's message from the past and his own promise to the future. Tomorrow, he would return both documents to Ms. Thornley, asking her to preserve them in the library's historical collection, where future generations could discover them. Some stories, Tom reflected, are too important to be forgotten again. Some letters carry messages that transcend their original purpose, becoming bridges between hearts separated by time and distance. And sometimes, he realized as he drifted off to sleep, the most important journey a letter can make is not from sender to recipient, but from past to future, carrying love and understanding to those who need it most. In his dreams that night, Tom saw Anna standing on a dock in Buenos Aires, her hair silver now, but her eyes still bright with the courage that had carried her across an ocean. She was holding an envelope, and she was smiling.
20 years later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the Plaza San Martin in Buenos Aires as Thomas Hartwell, now 32, a successful translator specializing in historical documents, walked slowly toward the address he had spent 2 decades trying to verify. In his briefcase, carefully preserved in acid-free folders, were 2 letters, one written by his grandmother in 1901 and one written by himself in 1948. The building was modest but well maintained, with balconies decorated with flowering plants and windows that caught the morning light. According to his research, an elderly woman named Ana Reyes lived on the 3rd floor, apartment 3B. The records suggested she was 87 years old, had been widowed twice, and had 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. Tom's heart raced as he climbed the stairs, each step carrying him closer to a reunion 67 years in the making. When he reached the 3rd floor, he stood for a moment outside apartment 3B, listening to the sounds of life within, a television playing softly, the gentle clink of coffee cups, voices speaking in accented Spanish. He knocked. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Behind her, Tom could see a small living room filled with photographs, books, and the comfortable clutter of a family well loved. "See?" the woman said politely. "Disculpe," Tom began in carefully practiced Spanish, then switched to English.
My name is Thomas Hartwell. I'm looking for Anna Reyes, who might have once been Anna Hartwell, from Connecticut, United States." The woman's eyes widened with surprise. "Hartwell," she repeated, and Tom heard something familiar in the pronunciation, an echo of the accent he had imagined when reading Anna's letters. "Abuela?" the woman called over her shoulder. "There's someone here asking about the family name Hartwell." From deeper in the apartment came a voice that made Tom's knees weep with recognition, not because he had ever heard it before, but because it carried the cadence of the letters he had memorized, the rhythm of thoughts he had come to know intimately across decades of wondering. "Hartwell," she said, closer now. "Did someone say Hartwell?" And then she appeared in the doorway, small, elegant, her white hair braided and pinned in a style that spoke of old-world elegance. Her eyes, though clouded slightly with age, still held the intelligence and determination that had carried her across an ocean when she was 20 years old. "I am Anna Reyes," she said, in English, only slightly accented by decades in South America. "Once, very long ago, I was Anna Hartwell. And you are—" Tom reached into his briefcase and withdrew the familiar envelope, its edges softened by age, but its message as vital as the day it was written. "I am Thomas," he said softly, "William's great-nephew, your grandson, and I have a letter for you that has been trying to reach you for 67 years." Anna's hand flew to her heart, her eyes filling with tears that sparkled in the morning light streaming through the windows. Behind her, Tom could hear the sounds of family being summoned, voices calling out in Spanish and English, footsteps on hardwood floors, and the rustle of people gathering to witness something extraordinary.
"William," Anna whispered. "Is William—" "He passed away in 1933, Tom said gently. "But he never stopped believing your letter would find its way home, and he never stopped hoping that someday his family would be whole again." Anna reached out with trembling fingers to touch the envelope, and Tom saw in her face the same woman who had written those desperate, hopeful words in a New York boarding house so many years ago. "Come in," she said, stepping back to welcome him into her home. "Come in, my boy. We have 67 years to catch up on, and I have so many stories to tell you about your grandfather Roberto, your aunts and uncles, your cousins who have been waiting their whole lives to meet William's family." As Tom crossed the threshold into Anna's apartment, he understood that some journeys take longer than a human lifetime to complete. Some letters must travel not just across continents, but across generations before they find their proper destination. Some stories need decades to ripen before they're fully ready to be told. Behind him, the morning sun illuminated the Plaza San Martin, where other travelers were beginning their own journeys to unknown destinations. In apartments throughout the city, families were sharing breakfast and making plans, unaware that just a few floors above the street, two pieces of a story that had been separated for nearly 7 decades were finally coming together. Anna's letter had taken 47 years to reach William's house. Tom's journey to find Anna had taken 20 more. But here, in a sun-filled apartment in Buenos Aires, with the sounds of family gathering around them and the weight of preserved love in his briefcase, Tom understood what his great-uncle William had always believed. There are no coincidences when it comes to family. There are only stories waiting patiently at the station, trusting that time knows exactly when each passenger is ready for their journey home. As Anna poured coffee and called her descendants to meet their long-lost cousin, Tom opened his briefcase and carefully removed both letters, the one that had started this journey and the one that would help them finish it together. Some stories, he thought, as Anna's great-grandchildren gathered to hear about their brave great-great-grandmother's adventure, are worth waiting for. And some letters arrive exactly when they're supposed to, not when they're sent, but when someone is finally ready to understand what they've always been trying to say. Algunas historias no fueron olvidadas, solamente se quedaron demasiado tiempo esperando en la estación equivocada. Some stories were never forgotten, they just spent too long waiting at the wrong station.
If you enjoyed this story, remember that every family has letters waiting to be discovered, connections yearning to be made, and love that transcends time itself. Sometimes, the most important conversations are the ones we have with the past, and sometimes the most meaningful journeys are the ones that bring us home to people we've never met but have always known. Until our next forgotten story finds its way to the surface, keep listening for the whispers of history. They're always there, waiting for someone with the courage to hear them.